Gam Ganapatiye Namaha. My salutations to Lord Ganesha. Hello and welcome to my channel, Vijay Jyotish. This is my very first video on YouTube, and I'm excited to share my astrological predictions about the US elections 2020. So thank you so much for tuning in. The question on everyone's mind right now is who's going to be sworn in as the next president of the United States in January of 2021? Is it going to be Vice President Joe Biden or President Donald J. Trump? And based on my astrological analysis, I can tell you that it's going to be Donald J. Trump who will be the next president of the United States. I tweeted about this and wrote an article even on Friday, November 6th. In that article, I mentioned quite a few details, and if you go back and read it now, you'll see that things are playing out quite nicely as I predicted. The article generated some interest, and so I thought I'd create this YouTube video and revisit that analysis in greater detail. So before we begin, I want to give you some context. Way back in August of this year, I made the prediction that Donald J. Trump would win the presidency. But as we know from the results on the election night and the following days, it sort of suggests that he'd lost the election to former Vice President Joe Biden. Something just didn't feel right about the outcome, but I took that setback as part of being an astrologer. You can't be right all the time. Sometimes the divine has plans that we can't foresee, and that's the way it's meant to be. So on Friday, November 6th, as I sort of reconciled to this fact that my prediction wasn't going to turn out, I happened to see this viral video of Dr. Peasnick, the interview that he gave on InfoWars. I don't know if the claims that he's making is true or not, but given his claims about the integrity of the vote, I wondered if these claims were true and if it was still possible for President Trump to beat Joe Biden and win this election. So this article that I wrote on November 6th and this video that I'm creating now are a direct consequence of that. Vedic astrology has the perfect tool for this. I decided to use a Prashna analysis of that pressing question. It is this analysis that revealed the nature of what would happen and how President Trump would emerge victorious. So what I'll do now is I will share the article with you and I'll show you the tweet as well. And then we'll go into the details in the analysis and I'll also tell you a little bit about what Prashna analysis is and how it's different from the other forms of analysis in Vedic astrology. So let me share my screen now. So here we're looking at my Twitter profile, and you can see this tweet from August of this year when I predicted that President Donald J. Trump will win this election. I also predicted that Democrats will make some inroads into the Senate. It looks like they will. And on November 6th is when I did the Prashna analysis, and I looked into this again. And what I divined from the Prashna analysis is that President Trump will still be the next president of the United States. And this is the article that I wrote on my website, vijayjyotish.com. You can see I wrote on Friday, November 6th, 7:23 p.m. in the evening. And before I begin, let me tell you a little bit about what Prashna analysis is. In Vedic astrology, there are a number of different ways in which you can analyze charts. The first method that most of us use is to analyze birth charts. So in this case, you look at the birth chart of President Trump and Vice President Joe Biden and look at how different events are going to manifest at different points in their life and make a prediction on that basis. But the key thing to remember here is the birth chart is sort of your karmic balance sheet at the time of birth. Both President Trump and Vice President Joe Biden have spent quite a bit of their life in this birth. And throughout this life, they perform karma, right? And that's been accumulating in their account as well. So the balance sheet that they have today is different from the balance sheet that they were born with. So that's one thing you should remember. And the birth chart analysis will not give you this information. Another thing that's taken into account is the current planetary transits. Where are the different planets today? What dignity are they in? Are they strong? Are they weak? Who are they aspecting? Which houses are they aspecting? How is this going to modify the results? So that's another layer of analysis that comes. But when you don't get good results with either one of these things, that's when you turn to Prashna analysis. And Prashna analysis is a way in which we can seek an answer from the universe. You have one really pressing, super important question for which you absolutely need an answer, then Prashna analysis is the tool that you need to use. And the thing about this is the Prashna analysis takes into account all the karma that you have performed in this life, and also the karma that your opponent has performed in this life as well, and the karma for this nation and complete situation. So it gives you a summary view that will answer the specific pressing question that you have. So in this case, the question is being asked from the point of view of President Donald J. Trump. And the question being asked is, can Donald Trump still beat Vice President Joe Biden to win this election? So that's a specific question. And the answer that will come from the Prashna chart is yes or no, with some details on exactly how that might happen. So Prashna analysis is also a little bit different in the sense that, the lagna that we choose, or the rising sign or the ascendant, is not the sign that is rising at that particular moment, but it's one that's chosen specifically after meditation and performing specific techniques. So when this question first came to my mind, that's the moment of time in which uh, we have to analyze the planetary positions to come up with the answer for whether or not President Trump can still be uh, the next president. But I don't take the lagna or the ascendant as rising at that particular moment of time. There are specific techniques, like I just mentioned, and once you use that, you come up with another lagna or ascendant on the basis of which you make predictions. So if you look at this chart, this is the Prasna analysis chart, and this is the Rasi chart, Divan chart. So the Udaya Lagna, or the rising sign, when this question first came up to me, was Makara or Capricorn. It was supposed to be this house. But after doing my meditation and other techniques and practices, I came up with the conclusion that the Aruda Lagna, or the Lagna that needs to be used for this Prashna analysis to answer the specific question of whether President Trump can still win, is going to be Libra. So, and then I looked at the D9 chart as well, which is the Navamsa chart. Is really important because this shows the inner strength of planets which may not be visible from the outside. So now that we have the Prashna chart, let's start our analysis so we can get the answer to our question. So if you look at the D1 chart, which is the Rasi chart, in Libra Lagna, you have Mercury and Sun. The Lord of the Lagna is Venus, and he's in the 12th house in Virgo. So looking at Sun in Libra, you can tell right away that Sun is at 20 degrees in Libra, and Libra is the sign of debilitation for Sun. So Sun doesn't really do well here. He's kind of weak, and 20 degrees is the deepest point of his debilitation. So he's the weakest at this point. So if you look at it from a surface, it looks like, hey, Sun is debilitated, and Sun represents power, he represents authority, he represents government, judges, all of those things. So you might feel like this isn't a good sign. But what this is essentially telling you is Donald Trump is looking at the prospect of losing power. And this first house in the Prashna chart represents President Donald Trump and sort of gives us a view for what he's facing right now. Mercury in this case is also in Libra in the first house. Mercury is a friendly planet to this Lagna and to the Lagna Lord, and he's at a good 18 degrees away from the sun. So he's not combust by the sun, he's not retrograde, and he's direct, and he's pretty happy. 18 degrees is a pretty good distance, so he will be able to deliver his benefic results to the chart. And Mercury represents lawyers. So you could say that this chart is showing that President Trump is faced with the prospect of losing power, and he's looking to both Mercury, lawyers, and Sun, judge, to help him out of this situation. So let's look at the Lord for this Lagna, Venus, and how he's doing. The Lagna Lord Venus is debilitated as well. So he's in Virgo. This is a sign of debilitation for him. 27 degrees in Virgo is the deepest point of debilitation, but nevertheless, he's there in the 12th house. The other thing is he's also in the 12th house. 12th house is a house of expenses, but the good thing here is there is an exchange going on between Mercury and Venus. Venus owns Libra, Mercury owns Virgo. Both are in each other's houses, so there's an exchange going on. This is called Parivartana Yoga. This isn't the best form of exchange that you can get, but nevertheless, it's not bad either. You can take this. It's definitely improving the position of Venus, I'd say, from debilitation. So one thing to note here is, as a result of this exchange, there's definitely going to be a lot of expenses, because 12th house is the house of expenses, and you can predict that President Trump is going to be spending a lot of money on his lawyers, which is Mercury, to get him out of trouble. And I've heard that, for example, Rudy Giuliani is being paid $20,000 per day. So that's quite a bit of money that he's spending on his lawyers. So one thing here is Sun, while he's debilitated in the Rasi chart, the The surprising news is that he's exalted in the Navamsa chart. So there is a lot of strong inherent strength in Sun that's not clearly visible when you look at it in the Rasi chart. So what this indicates is that although it might look like Trump isn't doing much to sort of overturn this election through the judiciary or through his lawyers, a lot is happening behind the scenes that we don't yet know about. It might seem like he's not doing anything and he's given up, but that's far from the truth. Another thing to note is Mercury is the lord of the ninth house and the 12th house. So the ninth house is in Vedic astrology the largest house, so it's sort of symbolic of the fight for the White House. So that's good to note. So Venus here, I mentioned that he's the Lagna lord, the lord of this Aruda Lagna ascendant, and he's debilitated. So that's kind of a signature of loss of power. But the interesting thing here is that he's also the eighth lord, which is this house. And the eighth lord being in the 12th gives rise to a Viparita Raja Yoga, so which would give President Trump the ability to capitalize on the gains of his opponent, which is Vice President Joe Biden in this case, and gain a position of authority as a result. So that's a good thing. Also, Sun is the lord of the 11th house here, which is Leo, and he's the lord that's going to govern the gains or the wins in this case. So you look at this and you say, hey, the lord that governs wins is debilitated in the Lagna, so he's not going to win. But that isn't true. The surprise comes when you look at the Navamsa chart and Sun is actually exalted in Aries here. So there is hidden strength that he has that's not available here. So if you don't look at the Navamsa chart, you'd make a wrong prediction. Another thing to take into account is Sun is the Badaka lord for this Libra Lagna. So what Badaka lord means is that one of his duties as part of the Lord of Gains is to block the individual. So what this means is that Trump could be blocked in the lower courts as he tries to get a result in his favor. But ultimately, when this goes to SCOTUS, the exalted Sun in the Navamsa chart will give him that victory in the United States Supreme Court. So that's the interesting thing here. So that's the first house. Now let's look at the second house. Now the second house is Scorpio. It has Ketu in it at 27 degrees. So Ketu is a planet that you'll find only in Vedic astrology. The same applies to Rahu as well. So Rahu and Ketu are the nodes of the moon. And Rahu represents the head of the serpent and Ketu represents the body. So Rahu is just the head and Ketu is the rest of the body without the head. And this is the exaltation sign for Ketu, which is to say that Ketu does really well in Scorpio. Amongst Vedic astrologers in India, there is a dispute on what the exaltation sign is for Ketu, whether it's Sagittarius or Scorpio, and the same confusion applies to Rahu as well. But in my case, I'm following the guidance provided by Sri B.V. Raman, who's world famous, and what he said was that Maharishi Parashara is the authority in this case. Whoever else came after him are scholars, but the view of Maharishi Parashara that this is the house of exaltation for Ketu applies. So, and that's what I'm using. So I'm considering Ketu to be exalted here in Scorpio. And the interesting thing about displacement is, if you've noticed, ever since November 3, President Trump hasn't spoken much at all, compared to his usual self. And he's been remarkably silent. He's not giving the media any tidbits that they can sort of use against him. He's been very, very silent, uncharacteristically silent. And I just mentioned that Ketu is sort of a serpent without a head. So you can see that the speech and the communication has been cut off. And the other thing that you can divine from this is that Ketu is also a malefic, right? And by his presence and being exalted in this Lagna, although he is a friend to the Lagna Lord Venus, you can see other forms of communication being suppressed as well. And I think you can sort of understand where I'm going with this. This is Ketu is a serpent without the head. So what comes from the head? Your ideas, your beliefs, your point of view, your communication, your speech. So if that is taken away from you or an attempt is made forcibly, so that is something that you can look at this position and divine as well. I think we're seeing that play out a little bit. And one final point about the second house is that the Scorpio house is a secretive sign. So whenever this is the second house in a chart, it brings a secretive element to all the aspects represented by the second house, which is primarily speech, communication, among other things. So there will be secretive communication that's happening. You know, uh, like I mentioned, Trump hasn't been tweeting much, but when he's been tweeting, there are reports that there are secret encoded messages in those tweets that he's communicating to his followers in a certain specific way. And these messages are being decoded using simple gematria and messages from the QAnon board as well. So the secretive nature of the communication that's happening uh, can be seen from this placement of Ketu in the second house of Scorpio, which is very interesting. Now let's move on to the third house. So in the third house, we have Jupiter at 27 degrees in Sagittarius. Jupiter is supremely strong in this position. He's the most benefic planet in Vedic astrology. He's not only strong in the D1 Rasi chart, he's in his own house in Sagittarius, both in the D1 chart and in the D9 chart. So this is called Vargottama in Vedic astrology, a very, very special placement indicating immense strength for Jupiter. You know, Jupiter is not a friend to the Lagna Lord Venus, but he's for this Libra Lagna not a malefic either. So he will help President Trump as he pursues his case in court. Third house deals with documentary evidence and it deals with appeals. So when Badaka Lord's son blocks him in the lower courts, Trump will be able to get the help of Jupiter to win the appeals in the higher courts on the basis of strong documentary evidence, because the third house deals with documentary evidence as well. You know, Jupiter, a planet in Vedic astrology, is a very voluminous planet, and he's, I would say, an obese planet. If you look at the shows that you see come out of India that show Jupiter in there as part of the planetary cabinet, they show this guy with possibly a six-pack abs, super handsome, and all of that. But in reality, Jupiter is kind of obese and maybe even dark. So what this suggests is that Jupiter represents immenseness in all forms, and his presence in the third house is showing that President Trump has an immense amount of documentary evidence in his favor. And with Jupiter's Vargottama placement, this should be the clincher. When it goes to the highest court of the land, when this documentary evidence is presented, it should be game over. And President Trump should come out victorious. One thing to also note here is the third house happens to be what's called a Marana Karaka Sthana for Jupiter. You know, it says that in this placement, Jupiter suffers so much, it's almost like he's dead. But if you look at things on the surface, that's the kind of wrong analysis that you'd come up with. One thing to note here is that Jupiter is in his own house, and he's extremely strong in Sagittarius. He's also Vargottama in the D9 Rasi chart. I'm sorry, D9 Navamsa chart. So there is a lot of strength here. Another thing, why they say the third house is a Marana Karakasthana is third house represents valor. You know, when you think of valor, you think of a fiery, action-based planet like Mars, which is why Mars does really well in the third house. Jupiter, on the other hand, I told you from a Vedic astrology point of view, is kind of massive and obese. So you can't expect such an individual to go around in an agile fashion getting things done. And I think this is where this Prashna chart is offering a lot of insight as well, because President Trump hasn't been visibly doing anything significant to show that he's fighting this really hard. You know, a lot seems to be happening behind the scenes, and his actions seem to be coming more from a point of view of wisdom and in a manner that's consistent with the art of war, as opposed to, you know, of force and agility and using valor to get things done, which is very interesting as well. And this is uncharacteristic of President Trump, I would say, so far. I mean, we've seen him to be more communicative and responsive than he has been so far. So this suggests that he is using wisdom to get victory in his favor, because Jupiter is the planet for wisdom. And although this is a Marana Karakasthana for him, this wisdom is coming to the rescue of President Trump, and you can actually see it in action. You know, he seems to be sort of working to a plan, and he's not making any rash statements. He's not giving the media anything, and it seems like he knows what the outcome is going to be on the basis of the strong documentary evidence that he has, which is very interesting. Jupiter is in this chart the lord of the third and also the lord of the sixth. The sixth house represents overcoming obstacles, you know. So what this is going to help President Trump is overcome obstacles in court to get victory. You know, it's not going to be a straight path to victory. We've already seen that happen. There are going to be blocks on multiple levels, but eventually he is going to win because Jupiter is so strong. There's just no way he's not going to win. So that's a given. So now let's look at the fourth house. All right, fourth house is Capricorn. It has Saturn in there. Saturn is very well placed in this chart. Fourth house represents home, and to have the lord of that house be in the same place gives immense strength to the chart. So you could think this is a second indication of the White House, and Saturn, the lord of that house, is there. There's just no way President Trump is going to get unseated from the White House. Just not going to happen, because Saturn is usually an extremely malefic planet. You know, he's the taskmaster, and he's very sort of impartial and unbiased in his judgments. If you made a mistake, he will punish you for it, no matter what. You know, but in this particular case, for this particular Lagna, he's Mr. Goody Two Shoes. You know, he's not going to do much of harm. Most of what he's going to do is a lot of good stuff because he's a class one Raja Yoga Karaka for this chart. And his presence in the fourth house pretty much guarantees that President Trump is going to be there in the White House in 2021 and all the way up to 2024. Another thing is the fourth house represents judgments, and in Vedic astrology, Saturn is the taskmaster or the master of judgment. You know, and his positional strength here, he's in the same house in the D1 chart and also in the D9 chart. So he's Vargottama, so he's immensely strong. Judgment will come from Saturn. You know, the right thing for America will happen when it goes to the courts here. So that's a very good placement for President Donald Trump. Now let's look at the sixth house. Sixth house is Pisces. It's a watery sign. It has retrograde Mars in it at 21 degrees. Mars happens to be the lord of the seventh house. So in Prashna astrology, seventh house represents the house of the opponent. Since this question is being asked from the point of view of President Donald J. Trump, seventh house would represent his opponent, who is former Vice President Joe Biden. And the lord of this house is placed in the sixth house of this chart, and he's also retrograde. So this is the first sign that I saw to come to this conclusion that the outcome of this election will be in the favor of President Donald J. Trump. Reason why I say this is Mars represents fire, Jupiter is a watery sign. What do you get when you bring fire and water together? The fire is going to get extinguished. You're going to have some steam and heat, right? And Mars is also retrograde in a backward motion, as seen from the point of view of Earth. So these are two signs immediately that show or indicate defeat for Vice President Joe Biden. Another thing is Mars is placed in the sixth house. Sixth house is the house of obstacles, and he's not well placed there. So it shows that Vice President Joe Biden will not be able to overcome the obstacles that he will face in court in the days to come. And the sixth house is also the 12th from the 7th. So if you count from here and go down this path, this will be the 12th from the 7th. Again, it's showing it's one of the Dusthana houses. It's showing that a loss for former Vice President Joe Biden. So the key thing here is we need to compare the strengths of Lagna Lord Venus and the 7th Lord Mars. And in comparison, I can tell you that the Lagna Lord Venus is stronger than the 7th Lord Mars. The retrogression, the placement in the 6th for Mars is definitely not something that Mars is comfortable with. So this is a clear sign that things will not go well for former Vice President Joe Biden. And if you look at the Navamsa chart, Mars, although he's in Pisces in the D1 chart, in the Navamsa chart, he is exalted in Capricorn. You know, one of the qualities of Mars is that he loves to fight, and which is why he's exalted in the house of his enemy, Saturn, Capricorn. But again, unfortunately, he's retrograde here. So what this is showing is he will fight the fight, but eventually face defeat. And it's going to be a very, very intense fight for sure. Let's move on to the 8th house. So in the eighth house, you have Rahu, who's exalted in Taurus at 27 degrees. Eighth house in Prashna astrology represents tensions, insults, obstacles that the queryist has to face. In this case, that is President Donald J. Trump. And I think you can see that in the selection, right? And Rahu also represents anxiety and chaos, and he's extremely strong in this position. So he and his family will have to experience this, and by extension, I would say all of his supporters as well, because his supporters are very passionate about Trump and his ideology. So they think they're part of his family. So you can see these tensions, anxiety, and chaos play out in those who are supporting Trump too. And every time there is some update in the media that suggests that Trump will not be president or something against him, you can see that people are affected significantly by this, and this placement is validating that. So moving on to the 10th house. 10th house has Moon, who's just entered his own house of Cancer. He is in Punarvashu Nakshatra, which is the nakshatra of Jupiter. He's also Vargottama on the D9 chart, so he's pretty strong. And 10th house is a pretty important house in the Prashna chart. It's a Kendra, and also it represents the judiciary and the investigative agencies. Moon in general, represents the public as well. So what this is indicating is that President Trump will get victory through the help of the public, the judiciary, and the investigating agencies. One thing to note here is that Moon represents the mind, and he represents the public, and in particular, he represents the emotional part of our mind, not the intellectual as much, which is represented by Mercury. And Cancer again is a watery sign, so emotions are likely to be really high on both sides. Both sides are extremely passionate about what's happening, and they really care about this, and you can see that here as well. Now let's look at the 11th house. I think we talked about this a little bit earlier when I talked about the placement of Sun, who's the Lord of 11th. He's placed in the Lagna. So he is the Lord of gains. If Trump is going to win in courts, it has to come with the help of Sun, who's going to give him that gain or win in court. We look at it on the surface, Sun is debilitated, seems like he doesn't have any power, but the inherent strength of the exaltation of Sun in the Aries Navamsa tells a completely different story. So what this is showing is that there is something hidden from us. There's a hidden trump card that Trump has that he's going to bring out at the right time to get in that victory. And we've been hearing a lot of allegations about the integrity of the vote, and maybe countermeasures that have been put in place, like encryption-based watermarks and so on and so forth. So these might be the trump cards. It's hard for me to say, but there is something that should be revealed in the near future that we'll all say, oh my God, this is the clincher. This is the evidence that we've been waiting for. And that'll be the trump card that's coming. And finally, we talked about the Lagna Lord as well. When we talked about the first house, he's placed in the 12th. There's a parivartana, like I mentioned, with Mercury. Since this is the house of expenses, President Trump and his legal team is going to be burning through a lot of money to get this win in court, but it'll be money well spent. It'll be going to his lawyers and his legal team. But if you look at the overall picture, this will deliver him the victory that he's looking for. So this, I think, summarizes the analysis that I wrote about in this article. You can look at this for some additional details that I may not have covered in this video. One other question that came up on Twitter is, this analysis is great, but when do you think this will actually go through the court system? And in Prashna analysis, for Trump to win in courts, it will have to come through Sun. And if you look at Libra, Sun has already gone through 20 degrees here. This is the sign of a debilitation for him. So he has 10 degrees left to sort of transit through in this house. And allotted time duration for Sun and Prashna astrology is 6 months. So 10 degrees left. On that basis, I would say 60 days from the time of doing this Prashna. So if you do November 6 plus 60 days, that puts us at January 5. So by January 5, we should have this settled in the courts. And the next week, you should have the official, undisputed declaration coming in from the powers that be that Donald J. Trump is the next president of the United States. So I hope you like this video. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening in. I would really be grateful if you can like this video, share this video, or subscribe to my channel. I don't monetize any of this stuff, but it keeps me motivated, and I might do more of this for you in the near future. Have a fantastic Thanksgiving and the rest of your week, and hopefully I'll see you soon in another video. Thanks so much. Take care.